March 2011. A massive earthquake rocks the world on its axis. The epicenter, 65 kilometers off the coast of Japan. Within minutes of the quake, a huge tsunami is detected racing towards Japan's northern shoreline. What follows will leave the world reeling.
Absolute destruction, not a building left standing.
The 2011 Japanese quake and tsunami is the costliest natural disaster of all time.
Japan has a long history of being hit by big waves. In fact, the word tsunami is Japanese for harbour wave. And it's this history that has led to Japan having the most sophisticated protection systems on the planet.
Japan sits at the junction of 4 major tectonic plates. It's why the area is so geologically volatile, and why the Japanese are so well prepared to deal with the threat. So what went wrong in 2011? The problems begin on March the 11th. Earthquake detection systems predict a huge tremor with a magnitude of 7.2. Warnings are sent out. Chris Alderson has lived in Japan for 13 years. He's come to expect such tremors as an everyday part of life.
Earthquakes are sufficiently common that people don't usually concern themselves with them overly. Some of them are so minor they barely even stir comment. Others, people will perk up their ears a little bit, point out the earthquake to their co-workers and get back to their work.
At 2:46 p.m. local time, the earthquake hits. With a magnitude of 9, it's 100 times more powerful than predicted.
You tend to expect them to fade away as usual. Instead, they sort of grew in strength and intensity to an extent that none of us had experienced before.
It's the largest known quake in Japanese history. One of the 5 most powerful ever recorded. The quake's epicenter is 65 kilometers off Japan's east coast, where a 300-kilometer section of the Earth's crust is pushed upwards by about 5 meters. It's a seismic event known as an undersea megathrust earthquake. The force of the shockwaves is so enormous, Japan moves 2.5 meters, and the axis of the entire planet shifts about 18 centimeters. Despite the magnitude of the quake, precautionary measures limit the damage.
There's a great deal of education among the Japanese population about how to behave during such disasters. So whilst there was concern, there wasn't the sort of terrified panic which one might suspect.
It appears technology has protected the Japanese. But the earthquake is just the first phase of a double disaster they're to face that day. Because the tremor has given birth to a tsunami, and it's heading towards Japan's northern coastline. Coastal engineer Alison Raby has been studying why the events of 2011 escalated into one of the worst disasters of its kind, placing it in the top 10.
We're going to simulate that megathrust type event using this hinged board down here. That's going to represent the edge of the crust that comes up in that type of rupture, and we're going to spring that plate up, and that's going to raise a huge body of water. 3, 2, 1.
In open water, the initial wave is relatively small, just a meter high. But as it approaches the shoreline and enters the shallows, it begins to slow and grow in height. All too aware earthquakes can cause huge waves, Japan has a sophisticated tsunami warning system.
In Japan, when there is a tsunami, warnings are automatically generated, which are heard on cell phones, brought onto television stations. Immediately, people were aware that something was going on.
Along Japan's northeast coastline, people begin to evacuate or take refuge in designated shelters.
Japan had one of the best defended coastlines in the whole world. And here we recreated certain parts of the Japanese coastline.
Raby and her team have reconstructed particular towns and their defences to examine how they coped when the tsunami hit.
We start here in the city of Kamaishi. Kamaishi was a deep water port, and it had the world's deepest breakwater. This was protecting the very large steel factory and a large population. Further south, we had the settlement of Minami Sanriku, and here we've recreated one of the vertical evacuation structures. This was clearly signed so that people who were on low ground could escape from the incoming wave. And then we move into the coastal plains. Now, these were protected by concrete revetments, and behind that, a pine forest. And those were all designed to protect the settlements behind.
The Japanese have taken a calculated risk. Their fortifications are only designed to cope with waves up to 12 meters high. But the tsunami surging towards them is a monster, peaking at 40 meters. In Tokyo, Chris Alderson is stunned by what he sees.
As we watched images on the screen of hundreds of thousands of people losing their homes and being hauled from their day-to-day humdrum lives, it was something none of us could comprehend at first.
Alison Raby recreates the tsunami in miniature. By comparing footage from each of the towns hit by the tsunami to the model recreations, a demo can help understand why the best defenses on the planet failed so catastrophically. Not only did the trees do little to stop the wave, the shattered stumps added to the debris flow, making the tsunami even more lethal. The shelter in Minami Sanriku remained intact, but many similar shelters were too close to the shore, with over 100 ending up underwater. And after the tsunami passed, the state-of-the-art Kamaishi breakwater wall lay in pieces. To help the victims, Chris Alderson heads north to the flood zone.
We went from the humdrum day-to-day life in the big city to suddenly traveling through what appeared like a set from a science fiction post-Holocaust movie. To suddenly see these people torn from their homes, to see the scale of this destruction and death, where a boat is dropped in the middle of a village, or a large articulated truck is stranded on the roof of a factory. It was unworldly. It was very difficult to believe that this was a new reality.
The disaster gets even worse when a flooded reactor at the Fukushima Daiichi plant melts down.
Initially, reports were unreliable. We were not certain to what extent the radiation had spread and whether or not the situation was about to get worse or was going to come under control.
Thanks to the courage of the reactor workers, the situation is brought under control. The tsunami leaves over $200 billion worth of damage in its wake, making it the costliest natural disaster ever.
The scale of destruction was almost absolute. There were no people in the ruins that we could see other than military workers putting flags on human remains, marking cars with X's after they checked them to see if bodies were included. The smell of the decomposition of what had been washed out of the oceans, human remains, fish hung heavy in the air, and it was an experience I think nothing can prepare you for.
Japan was supposedly the best prepared nation on Earth to survive a mega tsunami, and yet even they underestimated the power of the wave. And for that reason, I believe that this event is one of the world's worst natural disasters.